Alexa, what's today's date?
Today is Sunday, September 8th.
Alexa, volume to 5. Alexa, what's today's date?
It's Sunday, September 8th.
Alexa, what time is it?
The time is 11:54 a.m.
Alexa, what's the quote for today?
The quote for today is "Man often becomes what he believes himself to be." It emphasizes the power of belief and perception in shaping one's character and capabilities. Whether we can achieve something is largely determined by our own thoughts and beliefs about ourselves.
I agree with that, 100%. Got these little shorts on today, y'all, because it's leg day. Y'all need to see these muscles in action. First, we're going to do a 5-minute warm-up. I've done this one many a times. It's from Mr. and Mrs. Muscles. Full body warm-up, 5 minutes.
This is Lucas. He just needs to cut out distractions. He could use some focus. Stars would never let you down. And you keep on thinking you can save yourself. But that's love. That's just love. You should know some things will hurt. And you'll end up getting hurt. I just hope that you will learn. That's just love. That's just love. You will get back up again, even if you don't know when. And it feels like the world is coming down on you. You have to move on. Deal with your broken heart. No matter what you think, you'll never ever get enough of love. Every time you feel the walls are closing in, and it seems like nothing makes it better, you should try to remember that's just how it is when it comes to love, comes to love. 'Cause you know sometimes it hurts, and you end up getting burned. And sometimes it can be beautiful. That's just love. That's just love. You will get back up again, even if you don't know when. And it feels like the world is coming down on you. You have to move on. Deal with your broken heart. No matter what you think, you'll never ever get enough of love. Deal with your broken heart. You have to move on. Deal with your broken heart. No matter what you think, you'll never ever get enough of love. Even if you don't know when. Deal with your broken heart. No matter what you think, you'll never ever get enough of love. I've been waiting all my life for someone like you. I would watch the days go by, wasted on you. I was out of use. Now I live every day, every night, every moment with you. I'm walking on air, and every day, every way, I feel like I can't lose. I wanna shout it out, ain't no limit. I wanna shout it out to the world.
You need to shave. Sorry about it.
I'm crazy for love, crazy for love, crazy for love.
If you're clean and you know it, wiggle right.
Just turn my air on. It's gonna be a hot one. So let me make sure my air is on. I ain't put my heat on by mistake. Alright, I did. So it's leg day now. We're gonna listen to a video in the background. It's Dr. Joy DeGroy, I believe. She's talking about post-traumatic slave syndrome. I listened to this presentation that she did a while ago with my cousin on a car ride, and I want to hear it again. So I was younger, and I just want to hear it again. And before this morning when I woke up, I was looking like, all right, what do I want to listen to when I work out? Or what do I need to hear right now? That's what always happens. I just say to myself, whatever I need, it's going to show up. I'm going to be directed to whatever I need. It happens all the time. So this is what I'm listening to today. I didn't feel like I needed that motivation workout type of compilation video. No, I needed to hear this today for some reason. But moving into the leg day, day number 15 of the Ironborn workout plan on the Darebee website. DAREBEE. Darebee. Like I dare you. B. No. All right, 4 different lower body workouts that we're gonna do 4 times each. Goblet squat. We got 10, 8, 6, 4. Excuse me. Forward lunges, 6, 5, 4, 4 per leg. Side lunges, 5, 5, 4, 3 per leg. And then calf raises, 16, 14, 12, 12. So goblet squats, we're starting off. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not even goblet squats. I lied. They're just regular squats. 10, 8, 6, 4. Look, I got my big dumbbell ready too for the goblet squats, but we're good. And I'm using 15-pound weights for all these. So 10, 8, 6, 4. Starting off with 10.
Together. Now, the reason I do that, and the reason why I
Want to share with you a powerful and important discussion from a scholar and author that lays the groundwork for understanding how the past has influenced the present and opens up the discussion of how Black freedmen American communities can eliminate non-productive attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors developed to cope and survive. Let's take a look at this very interesting discussion.
there's a kind of a fundamental basis for post-traumatic slave syndrome. How many of you are familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder? Yeah. Okay, so these are things, I mean, most of you are people who are in the field that have done the work. You're here representing the people who are really in the trenches, and I appreciate and respect that. The theory very often, when people hear it, post-traumatic slave syndrome, I try to kind of get at kind of what's going on in the room. There's ambivalence, there's feelings of, well, come on now, what are we saying now about the slavery thing? It's over. It's get over it. We're done. We have that kind of feeling. And how possibly is she drawing a connection between something that happened so long ago in contemporary society? Come on, are you trying to find an excuse? Are you trying to blame people? These are the natural kind of knee-jerk reactions to hearing the term post-traumatic slave syndrome. However, I would submit to you that, it's based on research. So I did about 6 years of research specifically looking at violence. My area of focus is violence. And I'll cover that in my PowerPoint. Also, some of you may not be able to see points of the PowerPoint, but we're going to make it available to you. So you don't have to worry about it. There's a website where you'll be able to download my PowerPoint. Isn't that correct? Did I say that right? Okay, so that part you don't have to worry about. But I kind of want to set the ground so that we can all advance and move forward together. Now, the reason I do that, and the reason why I began that way, is because there's an assumption, a fundamental assumption, in a room this size with people very well educated, people very well exposed, that we're all entering this discussion at the same level. And we are not. I can guarantee you we are not. We all have our ideas and our beliefs, and then we all have our experience. For example, the people of color that are in the room, all the people of color that are in this room are arriving in this room at a different level because they have lived in this skin. And we're rarely given any kind of appreciation or understanding of what you have to live with walking through the world with this skin. So you kind of come in at a different level of awareness about the discussion. And then you have folks that come into this discussion that are educated around it, that are clear about it, but can't really empathize their way through it. In other words, it's not a feeling thing, it's a cerebral thing. So some people stay intellectual because that's a level of comfort. Nothing wrong with that. But very different from the person who lives in the skin. It is personal and it is emotional. Okay, so all of that's going on in this room even before we get started. But as people committed, it may get a bit uncomfortable. But that's okay, because it's been uncomfortable living in this skin. It's been uncomfortable. And we have to learn how to deal with that discomfort and stay in the room. So when we look at the fundamental premise of trauma, and we understand the nature of trauma, we know that there have been other groups that we've looked at the etiology of contemporary behavior based on multi-generational trauma. One group, Jewish Holocaust, families of Jewish Holocaust, and the fact that the Jewish community is very, very clear about honoring that Holocaust. So much so that Spielberg will probably make another movie. And I'm not mad at him, because what he's doing is ensuring that the generations that come will never forget the Holocaust and its impact upon Jewish people. You'll look at folks throughout the world, even Aboriginal folks in the United States, where more focus is being done on what colonialism has done. We've looked at Japanese internment. We've looked at Australian Aboriginal folks. We've looked at multi-generational impact of trauma on people who have had tragedies, like the tsunami victims. We'll look at everybody. But when it comes to looking at Africans, there's a visceral response. Oh, come on, why are you? And it's a curious thing, as a social scientist to me, that you get so much pushback when you talk about Africa. and we look at the legacy of slavery, you get so much pushback. But
16.
more importantly, is why do you get the pushback? See, as a social scientist, I'm less concerned with the material, which I'm clear about. I'm more interested in why the behavior. Why is there such reticence at looking at this issue? And the answer is, when you peel back the layers of this, we peel back everybody's layers. Everyone gets naked in this room, and that's not always comfortable. It's also very comfortable talking about the other's pathology. And the reason why I think that becomes important is so that when we begin to engage in this discussion, we don't find ourselves falling victim to the fear, guilt, all of that stuff that's not useful to anyone. It's not useful. This means we're going to peel the layers back. And while 246 years, as it were, in American history of American chattel slavery, starting with 1619
Minute break.
to the ratification of the 13th Amendment in the United States, we're looking at 246 years of American chattel slavery. And it's very comfortable, and I think to some degree people can say, you can't have 246 years of trauma and expect that nothing happened, especially when that trauma was followed by more trauma, especially given the fact that there was never a point of healing. Not difficult to do the math here. This is not deep and philosophical. It really makes sense. But you know what else is true? You can't have 246 years of folks engaged in a traumatic experience that were white that went unaffected. That means everybody has been affected and infected by this thing. So that's the part that gets uncomfortable, because it's usually okay to look at the other. We're going to look at everybody. This is going to be one where we really show the elephant in the room, and only for the purposes of recognizing that unless we do so, none of us can heal. This is not a process that any of us can do individually by ourselves. This is a collective process. And so therefore, we're all going to be engaged. And it's not just a pointing of fingers at anyone. It's recognizing that you and I, all of us, have been impacted by historical multi-generational trauma. Now, let's look at it very specifically. When we look at trauma in its very, clinical sense, my background, clinical psychology, understanding what trauma is, people can experience a single trauma, one trauma, indirectly, meaning that they didn't have to be present for the direct trauma. Meaning, say for example, you all heard about 9/11 and taking down the buildings in New York, right? Yes? 9/11. Everybody in the world got told about that. Matter of fact, I think everybody in America got diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of that. But I would submit to you, we were traumatized long before that. But there were individuals that were at ground zero, and I know my niece was in one of the buildings. So she decided, while she was in one of the buildings, they kept telling her, just stay where you are. They kept saying, stay where you are. We think people should stay where they are. She said everything in her mind said, get out. So she got out. Matter of fact, she leapt over the security guard to get out of the building. And it's a good thing she did. But during that time, there were people at ground zero, for example, like my niece. And there were people who watched it on television. And then there were people in other countries who heard about it. So there are varying levels of understanding around this trauma that happened in the United States. There were people at ground zero, were there, saw folks falling out the sky, got videotape footage of it, watched it on television, invited folks over and drank beer. Not traumatized. No trauma. There were people maybe in another country, in Brazil, saw it on television, in psychotherapy right now, can't get on planes, on medication, and people talk softly to them twice a week. So the variance in terms of those who are traumatized by a traumatic event and those who are not, we're unique as individuals. Everybody's not traumatized by a traumatic event, whether it's direct or not. But when we start talking about chattel slavery, we're not talking about one trauma. We're not talking about a specific event. We're talking about generations of trauma with no intervention. Based on what I know about sugar plantations, tobacco in the Caribbean, what I know about American chattel slavery and the plantations there, does anyone right now ever recall mental health assistance to slaves? Anybody remember sending in the therapist after I sold off your son, daughter, raped folks? At any point? Never. Second question. After slavery was officially over, now you're free. Anybody remember any therapy then? We know it's been rough, it's been deep for you, it's been difficult. We're gonna do a little group therapy. Anybody remember that? That would be no. Number 3, after slavery officially ended, both in the States, in the Caribbean, the British, do you remember whether or not trauma continued? Did the trauma continue for people of African descent? I need to know. Okay, so now let's do the math. Hundreds of years of trauma, no treatment. Freed, more trauma, no treatment. What do you do the math? Do you think there may be residual impacts of that trauma? Of course there is. It didn't end, friends, and it hasn't ended yet. So I think on one point, African people and people of African descent are extremely resilient. Matter of fact, I think we're a miracle. Far be it for us to pathologize or to look and cast this idea of weakened, sick people. Oh, on the contrary, we are profoundly resilient because we've done everything we've done thus far with no help, with not even the ability to have this discussion. As though it were possible, we escaped injury in all those hundreds of years and the years that followed. So this kind of journey I'm going to take you on is going to be one that really gives a perspective on what this trauma was, what it looks like, and clinically, what is post-traumatic stress disorder? What does it look like? And let me give you a little snapshot. We'll get into it in more depth a little later. But post-traumatic stress disorder, if in fact you are diagnosed with that, again, remember, direct or indirect trauma, here are some of the symptoms. A feeling of foreshortened future. Now, what does that mean? A feeling, well, you're not going to live long. How many of you are running into young people that don't believe they're going to make it past their 20s? Feeling of foreshortened future. Exaggerated startle response. Outbursts of anger. Difficulty falling or staying asleep. Hypervigilance. Right? These are symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. This is like DSM stuff, Diagnostic Statistical Manual Mental Disorders. It's in there. And there's a whole listing of all these symptoms. Now I want to roll it back so you can understand what the transmission theory is, because I'm going to talk about transmission. So how does a person that's been traumatized by post-traumatic, literally has a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, and can we, if we are logical and we are reasonable people, assume that a fair number of Africans had to have had post-traumatic stress disorder? You think? I'm not talking about us, I'm talking about them. Untreated though, right? Okay, so now let's do the math. Mom, who saw dad sold or sister raped, has post-traumatic stress disorder. Still mom though, right? Only mom now has outbursts of anger, feeling of foreshortened future, difficulty falling or staying asleep, hypervigilance. That would be mom. Now, Johnny or Mary or Shaquisha did not have the original trauma. But what are they learning? This is called social learning theory. What am I normalizing? Exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger. Are you following me? So I didn't have to be traumatized. Now, the other thing is, do you think Johnny and Mary got traumatized too? Do you see? So what happens in your environment, you learn from the significant others in your environment. And if they're broken, guess what you're going to be? You're learning from broken people. And you're normalizing that behavior. And then it becomes, years later, 2008, that's their culture. That's just the way they are. That's their culture. So there's poison in the cookies, right? But how are you going to tease out that poison? That means you have to look at the etiology of the behavior, which is what I spent many years doing.
6.
And it's not rocket science. This is not deep. Like I said, this is not required that, someone has, it's just common sense. many of you in the room think you can cook? Come on now, I know it's a strange place. You all have the oddest food in the world. I'm trying to tell you that now. Those of you that know how to cook, who taught you how to cook? Mom, dad, family. Who you think taught them? Hello, social learning theory. You learn from those in your environment. And if they couldn't cook, yeah, likelihood is you can't either. Okay. So there's things that we don't question them. This is what goes in the curry. What are you talking about? This is how you make curry. Well, how you know? Because that's the way my mother made it. Well, maybe, she didn't get the recipe right. Actually, I wrote Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, the book, which is here. The book is called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing. I recently have written a study guide, which is being edited now. But the reason why I wrote the book is really to put a name to what I was looking at. I started to look at behaviors in African people. And
I should only did 6, I did 8.
A long time. People asked me all the time, this was interviewed by ABC. They wanted to know, where did this come from? It came from growing up black. There's nothing deep there. I grew up looking at black folks and wondering why we behaved the way we did. Very little had to do with white people. Very little. I was looking at black people and I wanted to understand our behavior. I am 50 years old and I remember looking at people who were, growing up in South Central Los Angeles. That's where I grew up. My parents are from the South, from Louisiana and from Belize. And one of the things that I started to notice are certain behaviors that black people engaged in that I started realizing, not just African Americans, African Caribbean people. I came here, heard the same thing. Behaviors around what we look like. Like, for example, I would hear people, and most people here, white or black, or wherever you are in the spectrum, you've seen the behavior and wondered about it. And I know you have, because I wondered about it. Where you have black people that aren't black. How many people have met black people that actually aren't black? Now, this is an interesting phenomenon. These are black people that will tell you before, first of all, they certainly look black to me. They look black, but they don't say they're black. I've got quite a bit of Indian in me. Did I mention that a lot of my family are from, all of a sudden there's something else, right? And you're looking going, you're gonna fool me, you look black to me, right? Now this would be something that I could ignore if it stopped when I was a child in South Central, but it didn't. You can hear it in rap music today. Same behavior. Matter of fact, the rap videos, they just need to clone the same girl, right? I can draw her right now. What she looks like. The little wavy hair, and she's black, but not too black. Okay? And what is that about? What is its etiology and why does it persist? That means that it's an intracultural phenomenon that's being passed along through generations. But why? What is this self-loathing that I see in contemporary black folks? I'm not going back to slavery. I'm talking about today. Who hate and despise the reflection in the mirror. That's what I wanted to know. So that's what led me on my journey, if you will. Again, not an unusual journey. In our course, I'm going to kind of pop back and forth through British history and American history. James Madison was a very important figure in American history, President of the United States, 1751 to 1836. He said blacks are inhabitants,
12.
but as debased by servitude below the equal level of free inhabitants, which regards the slave as divested of 2/5 of the land. This is called the 3/5 compromise. And what they were trying to figure out is, what are we going to do? How are we going to count these black folks? Because, based on how many people you have residing in a particular state, the more representatives you can send to the House of Representatives, and thus the more power that particular state can wield. So the question was, how do you count the slaves? Well, Southerners, who of course enjoyed slavery, they wanted to count them. They say, yeah, count them. That gives us more power. Where the Northerners saw it as an opportunity to abolish slavery, said, well, you can't count them because you don't consider them human. How can you count people who have absolutely no freedom that you do not count or treat as human beings? So the agreed upon solution is to count 3/5 of a state's total slave population. And so as a result, they became 3/5 of a man, divested of that. But it's almost as though you're not talking about a human being anymore. And that's what's scary about this. And I always start my talks by saying that when you see folks dressed up like this, and I know y'all see a lot of
One more.
you should get worried. I always get concerned when I see them dressed up like that. Like this guy here. This next guy was someone that I struggled with. You all know him. Richard Oswald. He's the son of a Presbyterian minister, international trader of enslaved Africans. What's so deep about this gentleman is how wealthy he became as a result. He would be worth, based on the 1700s, right now he would be worth 68 million. Based on the number of slaves, the slave trade, and colonies, ships, all the stuff that he basically utilized. But again, these folks are held in high regard. When I read about him in your history, you would never know. Google it. You'd never know the ugly trade that he was engaged in because we've sanitized it, you see. It all got kind of sanitized. But what's important is to understand the wealth amassed. And see, this is where people get afraid, particularly Europeans.
My legs are filling.
This is where the whole, oh my God, dare I say the big ugly word, most folks are afraid of, because we don't really care too much about the healing stuff. Go on and get better, you people. But don't try to touch the resources. That would be reparations. We don't want to have that conversation. We're okay if you all go heal, however you're going to do that. But let's not talk about the reparations story. But when you start looking at the wealth amassed, then you got to look at the Church of England. It gets real ugly, because then you start realizing what is a foundation for the Church of England. Folks that bless the slave ships. And then, of course, and this is interesting about John Newton, because we all know about, first thing you hear, John Newton, what's the next thing you hear? Amazing Grace. John Newton, Amazing Grace. Well, let's figure out what happened before he got Amazing Grace. He said slaves are lesser creatures without Christian souls and thus are not destined for the next world. Now, what becomes important about this kind, and you'll see it both in American history as well, there is this kind of dehumanization of African people. Because you got to ask yourself this question: how do people who deem themselves superior, who see themselves as the civilizers, who recognize themselves as what we call manifest destiny, the white man's burden of civilizing all the rest of the races, how do you reconcile being the superior being and engaging in barbaric behavior? What that produces is something called cognitive dissonance. How many people are familiar with that? Cognitive dissonance is really thinking discord. It's when you begin to feel conflict between what you believe or understand or hold to be true, and you are then faced with behaviors, either in yourself or others, that conflict with your fundamental belief. It produces cognitive dissonance. Human beings don't function well with cognitive dissonance. You must remove the cognitive dissonance in order to function. So in order for people to perpetuate slavery and to perpetuate that whole system that lasts for centuries, you had to remove all dissonance associated with it. Can't be anything wrong with me. Certainly isn't us. We're the civilizers. We're the superior, so it must be them. Oh yes, well you see, they don't even have souls. Now I can go to sleep because I'm not really dealing with the human being. Are you following me? Okay, let's see what else he said.
3.
He said, when the women and girls are taken on board a ship, naked, trembling, terrified, they are often exposed to the wanton rudeness of white savages. The prey is divided upon the spot. Look at the choice of words, the prey. Resistance or refusal would be utterly in vain. And then he says, I sinned with a high hand. Yeah, and then he wrote Amazing Grace. Okay. So it's really important to understand that hand in hand with the behavior was a mindset that is so damaging. You see, I call it the secret. Not the secret that everybody's been talking about, that secret. The secret is the kind that makes you sick. How many people here are in mental health, have done direct mental health treatment with folks? If you're not you know that the secrets make us sick, yes? Isn't it the secrets that cause people the pathology? Right? How long have white people had to hold this secret? How long and how many generations had to stop and pretend Grandpa didn't do what he did? That the wealth we enjoy was not on the backs of some of these little girls. Think about how long one had to keep that secret. And the only thing you can do is either pathologize the other. It's all their fault, because it certainly wasn't great-granddad. Look how well he dresses. Do you understand what I'm saying? So this, when I say that this pathology goes hand in hand, I kid you not. Then you have science. And whenever we are in a process of trying to legitimize things, it's so amazing.
12.
You know, people always say this to me. Even black
Last
people
round,
hear about
last
post-traumatic.
exercise.
Because you know it's not correct unless you can count it and measure it, right? Science is the final. It is the number one. If you can say it's scientific, then you basically trump everything else, right? Science determines reality. So if we can scientifically assert a thing to be true, then in fact it is true, because it's scientifically proven. It's a scientific fact. Matter of fact, that's what people will tell you when you try to say to them, well, I don't know if I agree with you. You know, it's scientific. It's a scientific fact, what I'm saying here, right? Which somehow makes it what? True. And it's also in a book. Now let's do the math. It's in a book, and it's scientifically proven. Did anybody here realize that recently we lost a planet? Did anybody know what planet we lost?
Pluto.
How you lose a planet? You know, I became fine
Because
with
it wasn't a
the
planet to begin with.
We lost a planet. We didn't lose a planet. You know what it means? Science was wrong. Now, have they ever said, you know, we were wrong about that planet thing? No. It's called a paradigm shift. So let's go to science. And I think it's important that we do. So we go to someone named Carl von Linnaeus. Now, Carl von Linnaeus becomes an important character in this whole conspiracy of silence and legitimacy and removing the dissonance. Carl von Linnaeus developed a system based on a criterion of skin color and laid the basis for 19th century racial classification.
Stretching now.
Linnaeus properly began the science of anthropology. So here we have the thought of anthropology. Although color classification of races dated back to the ancient Egyptians, anthropologists refer to Linnaeus' Systema Naturae of 1735 as the first modern study of man. While Linnaeus advanced classification with his use of a color criterion, he also fixed on his 4 families of man certain moral and intellectual peculiarities that continued into the 19th century anthropological vocabulary. He described Homo Americanus. Who might that be? That would be Native American. American Indians. Homo Americanus. And what did he say about them? He said they were reddish, choleric, obstinate, contented, and regulated by custom. Homo Europaeus, as white, fickle, sanguine, blue-eyed, gentle, and governed by laws. Homo Asiaticus, that'd be Asians, as sallow, grave, dignified, avaricious, and ruled by opinions. And Homo Afro, as black, phlegmatic, cunning, lazy, lustful, careless, and governed by caprice. These insights into what Linnaeus defined as racial character, personality traits, behavior, intelligence, language, and a host of other related categories were transmitted into subsequent attempts at a science of classification and became more fixed than the races themselves. Not a shred of science here. But it is in a book. And it's touted as science. And what's more important, you know, my students, I teach graduate students in social work. And they'll say, but Dr. Leary, My God, we're looking at 1707 to 1778. We are, right? After all. But do you not hear these same attributions today? You know, those blacks, they're lazy, all the exact same. Am I telling the truth? In your newspapers, in your accounts of them, do you not hear these very same things? So does it matter that it started in 1707 and 1778 and has no scientific merit? That's multi-generational, is it not? It's being passed along. Part of the swallowing into the social gullet. Those are the beliefs, you see. So it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. And thank you, Carl von Linnaeus. Again, he's removing the cognitive what? Don't they deserve to be treated the way we treat them? Have we not just justified what we've done? After all, I just told you this is who they are. We're not wrong. We're just trying to keep the domestic tranquility. Makes sense. I'm having a clicker thing. There we go. Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. Just look at him. He's not right. We can tell already. But he had to contribute his part as well. He says, now this man, Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, he was an individual. How many of you are familiar with the term Caucasian? Oh, yes. Then you know Johann. He would designate 5 races or varieties of man in the second edition of his work on the natural variety of mankind. His division into Caucasian, Mongolian, American, Ethiopian, and Malayan races, with the added Carl von Linnaeus descriptive peculiarities, became the subsequent basis of most 19th century anthropomedical studies. While Carl von Linnaeus founded his system principally upon skin color, Blumenbach considered a combination of color, hair, skull, and facial characteristics as fundamental means for classifying the 5 varieties of man. Central to his study was the Caucasian, a term which he originated. He took the name Caucasian, listen for the science, from Mount Caucasus because its southern slope had cradled what he felt to be the most beautiful race of men, the Georgian. The Caucasus near Mount Ararat, upon which the biblical ark came to rest after the flood, seemed the appropriate source for the original race of man. No science yet. Now I'm going to quote him. These are his words. For in the first place, the stock displays, as we have seen, the most beautiful form of the skull, from which as a mean and primeval type the others diverge by most easy gradations on both sides to 2 ultimate extremes. That is, on the one side, the Mongolian, on the other, the Ethiopian. Besides, it is white in color. Anybody here ever met a skull that wasn't? Besides, it is white in color, which we may fairly assume to have been the primitive color of mankind. Zippity-doo-dah, no science, nothing to found this whole thing. He figured white skull, humanity began white. It's scary, but it's in a book, and it's touted as science, and we swallowed it without question. But race is a concept of society that insists there is genetic significance behind human variations in skin color that transcends outward appearance. However, race has no scientific merit outside of sociological classifications. There are no significant genetic variations within the human species to justify the division of races. Mankind is one. We are one humanity. Isn't it a shame that we are still debating that in 2008? But the reason why we continue to debate it is we still try to reconcile the ugly stuff that we've never dealt with. We still want to say they deserved it, so no one has to feel bad about all of those little babies dying, ignoring the ravages of Africa, and killing young black males and urban cities, all the and disproportionate imprisonment, disproportionate disparities in health. Oh, it must be their fault. How do you reconcile it? You see, rather than deal with it, we just continue to try to justify the behavior. Thomas Jefferson, you all know him? Yes, he's one of my favorite people, actually. I close out my book with a soliloquy from Thomas Jefferson. I actually end my book with it. Because Thomas Jefferson made a statement. Here's a man highly regarded in the United States. I mean, there are more statues of him than probably anybody. And he made a statement towards the end of his life. He says, "Indeed, I tremble for my country when I consider that God is just and that his justice cannot sleep forever." You see, it haunted him to his grave. Because Thomas Jefferson knew. He knew what would happen. Matter of fact, he predicted exactly what we're dealing with today would happen between people of African descent and those of European descent. Predicted it. He was a bright man. How do you reconcile behaving in such a barbaric way? Well, let's see what he said. He said blacks smelled bad and were physically unattractive. Well, this was inconsistent with his behavior. Because, you know, he fathered slaves, Sally Hemings. So they didn't smell that bad, huh? Now, here's a more important one. He said we required less sleep. Now, that one's more interesting to me. Why would he need to? What dissonance was he feeling that he would need to believe that blacks required less sleep? Why? What did he do? You know, he owned slaves. So what do you think? How hard do you think he worked them? What was a work day for a slave? Sunrise to sunset. But do you have any empirical evidence, Joy? Can you prove that? Because you know, if you can't write, count it and measure it, it didn't happen in European culture. Is that correct? You got to count and measure it. How many of you have measurable objectives? Measurable outcomes. You better measure it. I don't care if you tell them. Can you tell your boss, really, truly, at the end of the year, we're doing better now? I've been to work every single day I've watched, and I can guarantee you we're doing better. Is that going to fly? That would be no. That means you have to count it and measure it. And if you didn't count and measure, it didn't happen. So when you start looking at the notion of requiring less sleep, that's an interesting thing, because I have to believe if I work you that hard. And boy, I got humbled when I found out how hard folks worked in the sugar plantations. Ooh-wee, I got humbled by how hard folks in the Caribbean were worked. But what I decided to do is I looked at the Library of Congress. Most of my work over the 9 years that it took to write the book, 6 years of that was research. The other part of it had to do with doing interviews of elders and reading slave narratives, and there are thousands of them. This is
all right, guys, day number 15 is a wrap. We are at 48 minutes. All right, so we got a nice pre-workout in, a nice little warm-up, the main core workout, and then a nice cool down stretch afterwards. What I'm about to do right now is drink my protein drink. I'm gonna make me a peanut butter sandwich. I have a banana and some apples. While I eat that, I'm gonna finish listening to the rest of this. I was gonna say a glass of chocolate milk, but I'm having the protein shake, so never mind. And I made my protein shake with chocolate milk and almond milk. So yeah, I'm gonna eat that. Later on, I'm gonna have the rest of my food. I'm gonna be my salad from yesterday when I went to Olive Garden. So I'm gonna have the chicken Alfredo, my salad, breadstick. But y'all do something positive today for your mind, your body, your soul, and of course for someone else. Very important. All right.